Hello and welcome everyone. Today we are going to recap the movie series, Undisputed, and here is part 1 of the series. Our movie begins in Sweetwater Prison, and there is a competition called California State Inter-Prison Boxing Program, and the boxing match resulted in a Sweetwater Prison win. Then a music band of prisoners entered to make a concert as a part of the competition, and there is an old prisoner who is a mobster called Mendy, and that mobster Mendy was talking to a prisoner called Campus about a legend boxer from the past called Joe Louis and his downfall that came at the hands of the authorities that chased him for taxes. And here is another boxing match of the prison competition, but this time between two big fighters. The first one is from Ludo Prison called Van Zant, and the other one representing Sweetwater Prison, the Undefeated, who is called Monroe. Then the match begins, and we see why Monroe is undefeated. He is attacking that giant Van Zant so easily and embarrassing him. And during the match, we see a person in the background called Carlos Villarreal, who is a mafia person. And then we go, Monroe wins the match easily. And then the announcer announces that the undisputed boxer George the Iceman will arrive in Sweetwater Prison tomorrow. And then we watch a TV interview, and we find out from it the story of the undisputed boxer George the Iceman. We find out that he is convicted and he will spend 6 to 8 years in Sweetwater Prison. And the presenter talks with the Iceman about how he will be able to keep himself in shape as an athlete. But the Iceman tells him that he is not an athlete, he is a gladiator. And the Iceman doesn't care about his charge or stripping his title's belts from him. And while the Iceman on his way to Sweetwater Prison in a helicopter, we see flashback scenes of his fights. And we find out from the scenes that he is convicted with rape. And then he finally arrived to the prison, and Monroe was watching him from his cell window. Then the prison manager meets the Iceman and tells him that he banned all TV interviews and all that fame stuff that chasing the Iceman, and that this prison is well secured and disciplined as it contains all murders and rapists. But the Iceman requests CD drive and some CD, but his request is denied by the prison manager, who told him that these requests are impossible in the first 6 months. Then the prison security took the Iceman to his cell, and he finds his cellmate is called Mengo, who is convicted with car hijacking, and it appears that Mengo is afraid of the Iceman, who is telling him to stay away from him. And then the Iceman tells Mengo that he must tell everybody not to ask money from the Iceman nor talking to him unless he talks to them first. Then the mobster Mendy went to the Iceman cell and told him that he watched a lot of boxing fights, and there is a man here who could beat him. And that Mendy goes on further to tell the Iceman that he is no longer boxing well. Then Mendy left, and the Iceman asked Campus, who came with Mendy to the Iceman's cell, about the name of the man Mendy talking about, and Campus told him that his name is Monroe. And during the prisoner's breakfast, the Iceman asked Mengo, where is that Monroe? And Mengo told him he is the man with the white cap. Then the Iceman went to talk to Monroe and tries to get under his skin, and then the Iceman slapped Monroe, and the other prisoners separated them before fighting each other, while the Iceman shouting, there is no champion here but me. Then the prison manager talked to the Iceman about that incident, and the Iceman told him that he is not just a normal guy. He is the heavyweight champion and probably that most famous person on earth. Then we see that the assistant of the prison manager tells him that the Iceman is a public relationships nightmare. And we find out that the Iceman used his authority to make Monroe responsible for the incident. Then they put Monroe in the solitary confinement as a result of that. Then we see the Iceman tries to make a problem with Monroe assistant to deliver a message to Monroe. Then the public administrative officer visits Monroe in his solitary confinement, and she tells him about the procedures of moving him to another prison, but he tells her that all prisons are the same. They all just prisons. Then she asks him if he is afraid of the Iceman, but he tells her that he is not, because if they fight each other, the best man on that day will win, and everyone is going to be beaten one day, either because of his age or something wrong on that day. Then we return to the Iceman, who is in a visit with his manager, and his manager tells him that he should tell his lawyers to get him out of prison quickly to fight the new crown champion after stripping the title from him, because if he spent the whole sentence period in prison, he will be too old to return to boxing, and everything he built will be gone. Then we see a call between the Mafia and Campus talking about protecting the mobster Mendy and keeping him healthy. Then we see the prison guard talking to Mengo about the Iceman hitting one of the prisoners, but Mengo denied the incident. Then we see the lawyer of the Iceman visiting him and telling him that the rape case got worse and he needs a special lawyer for that case, and the taxes case also, and that his financial status is in chaos because of his financial manager, and he better focusing on not making so much problems in prison to be released early before his period ends. Then we see flashback scenes of Monroe, and we know from them that he was a champion in boxing before entering the prison. We return to the Iceman as he is discussing the new details of his rape case with his new special lawyer, and it turns out that he is in a bad situation, but he still denies the rape. Then some gang in prison invites the Iceman to join them, but he went to their territory and destroyed them. Then he became in the solitary confinement, and the prison manager summoned him and told him that this record of physical confrontation is unacceptable. But the Iceman tells him that he does that to earn respect and to survive, because every single one wants a piece of him. We return to Monroe's flashback scenes where we find out that he was convicted with murder for beating a man to death because he caught this man with his wife, so he will be in prison for the rest of his life. Then the mobster Mendy tries to arrange a boxing fight between Monroe and the Iceman to earn money from betting, and he calls the mafia and asks them to do whatever is needed to make the prison manager accept the fight, because he was the only person who was against it. Then we see that the prison manager accepts the fight and tells the guard to get Monroe out of the solitary confinement to get ready for the fight. And he tells the guard further that the fight should happen while he is in vacation, so he will not be responsible for it, and continues to tell the guard that he wants this boxing program to end by the time he returned from the vacation. Then the Iceman called his manager to come to visit him, and when he visited him, the Iceman told him happily that Mendy the mobster offered him to fight Monroe and he will get him out of the prison. And the manager responded, if he only said that himself, he will do it. But the manager warned the Iceman that Monroe is dangerous and undefeated, but the Iceman told him that he spent 10 years in prison, so he is not dangerous anymore. Then Mendy the mobster summoned Monroe alone and offered him the fight for some privileges in prison, and Mendy said that this fight will bring $4 million or more of betting if Monroe won. But Monroe said to him, privileges are nothing here. I want money. I want a percentage of the money you will get. But Mendy says to him, what is importance of money while you are in prison? But Monroe responded, and what is the importance of money for you also while you are old that can die anytime and still in prison too? And Monroe continued to say that he wants 50% of the money like boxing outside. But Mendy says 30%. Then Monroe said, I have a sister that has kids and no job, and I will give her all the money I get, so I want 40%. And Mendy accepted the offer, and the deal was done. Then Mendy went to meet the Iceman to complete the other part of the deal. And the Iceman told him that he only will take the fight if he can get him out of the prison. And he asked him how he can get him out of the prison. Then Campus responded that they have a guy in the Committee of Corrections. Then the training begins. And initially the fight was with bare hands, not with gloves, but they were training hard to get ready for the fight. But the Iceman's manager was pushing for the fight to be with gloves, and he said to Mendy that the fight with gloves is better for the show because it will make the fight longer. But if the fight is with bare hands, it will end with a quick knockdown, and people will not want something like that. Then Mendy accepted that the fight will be with gloves, knowing that the Iceman manager is right. But things will not always go well, as one day the prisoners made riot against the Iceman supporting Monroe. So the prison manager canceled the fight, and Mendy the mobster was so angry about canceling that fight, and he asked for a meeting with the prison manager. And it happened. The prison manager went to meet Mendy under the pressure of the mafia, and the prison manager told him directly that any attempts to convince him to make the fight on will be failed. But Mendy told him a story that means a threat to him, and he offered the prison manager either he takes some money and make the fight, or something wrong will happen to him or his family. So the fight returned to be on, and the training continues. Then we see the mafia calling Campus and trying to convince him to make a deal with the Iceman to lose the fight so they can win millions of dollars from betting. But Campus told them that Mendy wants a fair fight, and it is not about the money for him. But the mafia responded that Mendy all his life does not care about anything but money. Then we are moving to Monroe, who is being offered by all the gangs that have problems with the Iceman to slow down the Iceman by giving him some drugs. But Monroe refused that, and he said to them that he can knock down him by himself. And finally, the day of the fight came, and Monroe and the Iceman were getting ready for the fight. And here comes the prisoners' fans to the arena to watch the fight. Then the prisoners' music band sang the national anthem. Then Monroe and the Iceman entered the ring, and the announcer made a great speech introducing them. And here we go. The fight begins, and the two fighters throw big punches. But the Iceman dominated the first round, knocking down Monroe at the end of it. But Monroe survived from it. Then Monroe entered the next round with the power of combination of punches he has and embarrassed the Iceman. Then when they entered the following round, they threw at each other some violent big punches, and the fight became intense until Monroe finally hit the final knockdown, and the Iceman fell to the ground, and the referee announced Monroe's win. Then Campus tells us that Mendy died 3 weeks after the fight, and he gave the money to Monroe, and the Iceman released from the prison, and Mendy left $2 million to Campus, so he has no excuses when he leaves the prison. And Campus still told told us that the Iceman and his team denied the fact that the fight between himself and Monroe happened, and they said that it was a rumor. Then the Iceman played the fight with the current heavyweight champion to restore his title again, and the fight was close until the Iceman knocked the current champion down and won the match and his title back. And the prisoners were watching the Iceman's match, and the assistant told Monroe, who was in his cell, that the Iceman won, then shouting Monroe's name. And Monroe remains the undisputed with undefeated record, the one and only Monroe. And now, let's start part 2 of our series. Our movie begins with George the Iceman. He is filming an advertisement in Russia, but he can't speak the Russian language correctly. So he is in argument with the director. But George gets angry and breaks the product. But George's manager talks to George and says, "George, listen to me. You are not the champion anymore. The matter of fact is that you are broke. All you have to do is to do this job and get your money and be rich. Then we have a dinner with this corporate, and then you return to your home as a rich man. So let's do this." Then we go to a nightclub where its owners are talking about betting on boxing fights happen in Russian prison and aired on TV, and they lose the betting money because there is undefeated prisoner boxing called Boyka that no one bets against. And one of the owners tells the other that tonight Boyka will fight against someone extremely good, but the other one tells him, "I heard that before." Then the announcer introduces the fighters, and we saw that George on his way to the dinner place in a hotel, and we see some strange persons enter the hotel where George will have dinner with the business people. And these strange people are doing some strange stuff in the hotel, and it appears that something wrong will happen. Then the match begins, and Boyka is having intense fight against the tough boxer, but Boyka managed to knock him out with violent punches. And here comes George. He arrives to the hotel, and his manager said to him, "You are 1 hour late for the dinner." But George responded, "I forgot about that dinner thing." But his manager said, "Okay, let's take a drink with them and leave." But George said to him, "Give me 10 men." But his manager told him that this will be a disrespect to them. So George told him that he does not care, and he will take 20 men instead. We return to the fight. The tough boxer managed to get up again in a miraculous way, but Boyka gave him a deadly combination that destroyed him quickly. And we see the strangers cut the Bible and put some drugs in it. And when George entered his room in the hotel, he found a stranger in his room, so he beat him. But some other stranger hit George with his gun. Then they left him. When we return to the match, we find that the other fighter gets up again from this knockdown. But quickly, Boyka manages to finish him and wins the match. And the owners of the nightclub are talking about losing a lot of money with betting because of always winning Boyka. And if they did not find a way for people to bet against Boyka, they will be broke and close the nightclub by the spring. And when the police went to the room of the hotel where George was hit, they didn't find any evidence against any strangers. And George questioned why there were no any cameras. And in the prison, some prisoner said to Boyka, "Did you hear it?" And Boyka said, "Heard what?" The prisoner said, "The police is in his room right now. He will be here tomorrow." Then the police found the drugs inside George's Bible. And when the police confronted him, he immediately denied. Then George's manager asked him what happened. He responded, "They set me up." And Russian police arrested him. And it appeared on TV that George is convicted again after his case 6 years ago. Then the police took George to the prison where Boyka exists. And when he arrived, all the prisoners were watching him, including Boyka, who was exchanging challenging looks with George. Then they took George to the prison manager, who asked him, "How was your trip to here?" But George told him that he is sure that he doesn't care about his trip. Then the prison manager told George that he knows that he was convicted in USA. And George said, "You know who I am, and I don't plan to stay here any longer. Once my case settled down, I will be out of here." But the manager said to him that they have their own champion, Boyka. Then they took George to the shower, and it turned to be really cold. But when they tried to force him, he beat them up, so they had to bring the backup to force him to take the cold shower. And while he was on his way to his cell, the prisoners tried to provoke him until he reached his cell. And the following day morning, the cellmate of George tried to wake him up, but George told him, "I know how to live here." Then they went to have the breakfast. And when Boyka entered, everyone stood up but not George. And he even refused when his cellmate tried to warn him. And when one of Boyka's assistants went to George to make him stand up, George beat him. Then he went to Boyka and made fun of his name. But Boyka did not take the insult, and he got angry and clashed with George until the guards stopped them. Then the prison manager went to Boyka. Then Boyka said to him, "Why you you stopped me. But the prison manager said to him, you will have your chance. But Boyka said, I had my hands on him. But the prison manager said, I wanted to help. But Boyka told him that he didn't ask help from him, and he told him to not stop him. But the prison manager said, I will not stop you, but I will make sure that this ends in the ring. And Boyka gets angry. Then George's manager went to visit George and told him that his case became complicated, and George told him to bring his lawyer. But his manager said to him that his American lawyer is useless here in Russia, but he spoke to the embassy and they said that it may take a month. But George gets angry and says, a month? Do you know how hard to live here? You go and return with a team of lawyers and get me out of here. Then we see the owner of the nightclub went to the prison manager and gave him a bribe and asked him, where are we right now? The prison manager said he is taking his first steps, but the owner said, no time for first steps, I want the fight. Then the prison manager said that there is already bad blood between them, but the owner responded that he doesn't care about the bad blood and said, I have to start making some arrangements right now. But the prison manager told him that George is trying to gay out of the prison, but the nightclub owner said, let me deal with that and don't disappoint me. Then once, George was on the prison yard. Then he saw his cellmate gets beaten by Boyka's men for addiction, so George went to defend his cellmate and he beat them. Then George's cellmate told George that this prison is dominated with mobs, so stay here healthy, he have to deal with them. And when Boyka knew that his man got beaten by George, he wanted to clash with him. But George kept saying, fight me right now. But Boyka kept saying, fight me in the ring, until the guards separated them. Then there was a fight between Boyka and some other boxer, and the nightclub owner called the prison manager and said, what is going on with George? And the prison manager responded that they do all they can. But the nightclub owner said, you better do more. Then the fight begins, and Boyka presents a very strong, violent, and brutal performance that he nearly killed his opponent. Then he looked at George and pointed at him to deliver a message to him that he want him next. Then George noticed an old man with a wheelchair behind him looking at him. Then we see the guards went to George in his cell and told him that the prison manager wants to see him, but he told them that the only person he wants to see is from the US Embassy. But when they tried to force him, he beat them. Then they had to bring the backup and put him in a cell and tied him and started to beat him up. Then the prison manager entered and said, enough. You are making you life difficult, Mr. George, and there is a way to make your life more pleasant. You know our resident champion Boyka. We want you to fight him. But George said, I will not take part in this circus. But the prison manager said, think about it. You may be in a plane heading home, but George still refused to fight Boyka. So the prison manager told him, so, you bring it to yourself? And they sent him to clean the sewage, and when he refused to clean it, they threatened him. But the old man on the wheelchair came to help him. Then the Boyka men went to George's cellmate to pressure him with his addiction to make George fight Boyka. Then Boyka's men made an ambush for him, and they said to him that Boyka deliver a message to him. Then George beat them up, and the old man with the wheelchair helped him. But the guards put George in a wet cell underground in a bad condition, and with rats too, and they call it the hole. Then they went to Boyka and told him that George is in the hole, and people tend to change their minds when they are in the hole. And Boyka said, good. Then while George was in a bad health condition and having a fever, the old man with the wheelchair came and gave him soup, bills, and bread to eat. And George asked him, why you are helping me? And the old man responded, why you ask? George told him that from where he came, nothing is free. And George told him that he will not stay much longer here. But the old man told him that they will keep him here forever and will not get him out of here. Then they get George out of the hole and present him good food. Then here comes the owner of the nightclub, and it turns out to be called Gaga. Then Gaga said to George, do you know who I am? George responded, you are the big dog, right? Then Gaga said, I am the big dog, the man who brought you here, and the man who can get you out. And Gaga continues, I am a businessman, Mr. George, and I have a business offer you. George said, you want me to fight that Boyka? Gaga said, that his offer can get you out of the prison. But George gets confident and says, I have a man that can make this play a media circus. Gaga said, who is that person? George said, my manager. Then Gaga said that manager. Then suddenly George's manager entered. So George got angry quickly and said, what are you doing here? But his manager said to him that he must accept the offer and fight Boyka, and he will be out and will take some money. So this deal will benefit him. And George had to accept the fight. Then Boyka's assistant went to tell him that George accepted the fight, and George's cellmate offered to George to be on his corner to help him in the match, and he talked to George in their cell to strengthen their friendship. Then the training begins, and the two of them gave their best to be ready for the fight. Then Boyka's men went to George's cellmate, and he said to them, I did everything you wanted from me. He will fight, but they told him that he has one more job to do. Then we go to the nightclub on the day of the match, and everything is ready for the fight, and Gaga bets on Boyka by $500,000, but his assistant told him that 80% of the betting is on the American, but as long as he wants that bet, it will be done. Then the fighters enter the ring and the announcer introduces them, and they talk to each other face to face as Boyka says to George, "I will beat you in your game, only fists." But George responded, "Don't bleed on me." Then the bell rings and the fight begins. They are cautious and slowly getting close to each other. Then Boyka's assistant swaps the water bottle with George's cellmate, and it appears that something wrong will happen. But the old man with the wheelchair saw that swap. Then in the match, George is dominating Boyka in boxing and threw at him dangerous a combination of punches that knocks down Boyka. But Boyka miraculously stands up again and hit back George, but this time with his style, and seems that he knew that he can't beat George in boxing, so he returned to his style again, and Boyka gained the momentum. Then the first round ends, and each one go to his corner, and George asked for the water bottle, and his assistant gave him the swapped bottle he has, and George drank from it. But when the second round begins, and George became dizzy and doesn't see well, so he became a target to the big punches of Boyka until Boyka knocked him down and won the match. And when George woke up, he found the old man on the wheelchair beside him, and George asked him, "What happened to me?" The old man responded, "You have been drugged." George knew immediately that his cellmate drugged him. Then he went to punish him, but when he reached his cell, he found out that he committed suicide. Then George went to Boyka and told him that he is a coward, and he drugged him, and that is how he won the match. Boyka responded, "I don't need to drug you. I am the best fighter in the world." George said, "You drug your opponents and you call yourself a fighter." Then the prison manager entered and said, "You two can't get enough of each other." Then George went towards him and said, "You said I will get out of here." But the prison manager said, "I don't know anything about that right now, but I will look at this arrangement." Then George got angry and said, "You are a liar," and he punched the prison manager. Then the guards took George to the pole and tied him and left him to suffer in the snow. So Boyka did not know anything about drugging George, and he wanted to win honestly without any manipulation to prove himself as the best fighter and the undisputed one. So Boyka went to his men after he knew that they manipulated the match, and he told them all civilizations, Egyptians, Chinese, and American boxers turned fighting into science. So I am the next stage. Then he killed the two of his men who manipulated the match. Then George's manager went to Gaga and asked him, "Where you are going to release George?" Gaga responded, "Since what you care about Mr. George." George's manager said, "Given all the delay, I want more money." So they gave him the money he wanted and they let him get in the car. Then they killed him, and George was still tied to the pole in the snow suffering. But some other prisoners helped him by giving him coats and food and making him warm. But when the guards saw this, they informed the prison manager, and he gathered all the prisoners about who helped George to punish them. And when Gaga knew about what happened with George, he went to prison and got angry at the prison manager for doing this to George without his permission. Then Gaga went to meet George and he apologized to him. And George said to him, "We had a deal that I fight, then I get out." But Gaga said, "No, the deal was that when you win, you get out." George said to him, "You drugged me." Gaga said, "Maybe you need a better assistant next time on your corner." George said, "There is no next time." But Gaga said, "Okay, I hope you enjoy your stay here." George quickly said, "Wait, what about my manager?" Gaga said, "Don't worry about him and it will be the last fight." Then George said, "Okay, but no more drugging for me or Boyka. I want it to be straight fight. And there is one more thing." And it turns to be that they bring new coats to the prisoners who helped George as he wanted to return the favor. Then George starts to train, and then the old man with the wheelchair went to him and offered him to help him in the fight. And he tried to tell him his mistakes from the first fight, and he tried to teach him special techniques to beat Boyka in his game. Then they became friends that the old man told him about his niece and the story that led him to the prison. And both men, George and Boyka, trained really hard, and Boyka was too confident that he will finish George and calls himself the most complete fighter in the world. And here comes the day of the match, and everyone is ready. Then the fighters enter the ring and the announcer introduces them. Then the match begins, and George is dominating the fight somewhat, but Boyka is able to fight back. And that goes on round after round until George became able to use the special technique he learned. And he broke Boyka's leg, and finally, he won the match. Then Gaga got him out and gave him some money as a reward and apologies to him for what happened. Then George returned to the prison manager and gave him the money and said to him, "I want to make a deal." And that deal turned to be getting the old man with the wheelchair out of prison to meet his niece. And George took him to the railway station to meet his niece. But the old man was hesitant. But his niece arrived, and they hugged each other, and they couldn't believe they finally met. And that was a very nice way from George to return the favor.